That day felt like standing on the edge of something final. We were exhausted, fractured, and honestly I thought Queen was finished. But somehow, when Freddie walked onto that stage, something electric happened. It was like watching the universe wake up.
July 13th, 1985. A date that changed not just Queen, but music itself. Before Live Aid, Queen weren't legends, they were lost. Their last album had underperformed. Their US tours had stalled. The press had turned against them after their decision to play in South Africa. And inside the band, silence spoke louder than sound. Freddie had gone solo. The others barely spoke. The magic was fading. When Bob Geldof announced a charity concert to fight famine in Ethiopia, Queen weren't his first choice. In fact, he didn't want them at all. "They've peaked," he said. "They're done." But one voice in the planning room disagreed. Promoter Harvey Goldsmith, who knew Queen's live power was unmatched. He insisted they'd be perfect for the afternoon slot, the moment when crowds usually grew tired. Still, the band hesitated. They weren't sure they could do it. They hadn't played together properly in months. Freddie's voice was fragile. The chemistry was broken. And yet, there was something in that challenge that felt like a spark.
We didn't see it as redemption. We just wanted to feel like a band again, even if it was for 20 minutes.
They agreed to perform, quietly, almost reluctantly. No one, not the audience, not the organizers, not even the band, could have guessed that this hesitant yes would become the most legendary 20 minutes in music history. The decision was made, but the confidence wasn't there yet. After months apart, Queen walked back into a rehearsal room that felt more like neutral ground than home. The air was heavy with uncertainty. Freddie was still guarded. Roger kept to himself. John spoke little, and Brian tried to bridge the silence. At first, they rehearsed like strangers. The old rhythm wasn't gone, just buried. When they began to play Bohemian Rhapsody, the room filled with a kind of awkward nostalgia, like a family remembering how to talk again after years apart. But slowly, something started to change. As Freddie struck the piano keys and Roger's snare echoed through the room, the walls began to feel alive again. The music they'd written a decade earlier, the songs that built their empire, were waking up. By the second day, they were laughing again. By the third, the harmonies were back. Brian watched it happen from across the stage. He could see the old fire behind Freddie's eyes and the spark that had once lit arenas.
There was a moment in rehearsal, Freddie hit a note, just one note, and I remember thinking, there he is, the real Freddie. It was like lightning coming back to life.
They practiced relentlessly, perfecting every second of their 20-minute set. While other bands planned to showcase new material, Queen made a different choice. They would give the world everything they loved most about Queen. Pure energy, no ego, no spectacle, just music. When they left that rehearsal room, they weren't just prepared, they were dangerous again. The sun rose over Wembley Stadium to a quiet kind of chaos. Technicians rushed cables through puddles, sound engineers shouted into headsets, and the smell of rain and metal filled the air. Inside Queen's trailer, however, it was almost silent. Freddie sat on a couch, wrapped in a white robe, staring at a cup of tea he wasn't drinking. His throat hurt, and worse than usual. The doctor's warning still echoed in the room. You shouldn't sing today. But Freddie had already decided. There was no universe where he wouldn't go on. The band gathered around him. Roger tuned his snare in silence. John plucked soft bass notes just to feel the strings under his fingers. Brian looked out the small trailer window at the stage in the distance. The same stage that could either end or save their story.
That morning was dreadful. The air felt heavy. Freddie's voice was fragile, and we were all pretending not to notice. I honestly thought, if something goes wrong today, that might be it for us.
Outside, the crowd was already filling the stands. A sea of people humming with anticipation. None of them knew the doubts unfolding behind the curtain. Then Freddie stood up, slipped on his white tank top and studded armband, and looked at his bandmates with a grin that felt like defiance. "Let's do what we came here to do," he said softly. Minutes later, Queen began walking toward the stage. 4 silhouettes stepping out of doubt and into destiny. When Queen stepped onto the Wembley stage that afternoon, time seemed to hold its breath. No fireworks, no special effects, no grand opening. Just 4 men walking into the light, stripped of everything except the music that had once made them immortal. Freddie took his place behind the piano, his tank top gleaming under the sun. The crowd, more than 70,000 people, was still shifting, talking, restless. Cameras zoomed in, expecting another ordinary set. And then, the first chord of Bohemian Rhapsody rang out. It wasn't just a note, it was an announcement. The sound filled the air, sharp and alive, echoing through every corner of Wembley. Freddie's voice, though slightly rough, carried with impossible strength. Roger's drums struck like thunder, Brian's guitar sang with perfect control, and John's bass held it all steady. The heartbeat beneath the storm. Something electric rippled through the crowd. People who'd been chatting suddenly stopped. A wave of silence rolled over the stadium, followed by a collective roar. The camera panned across faces. Tears, smiles, disbelief. No one in that moment was thinking about Africa, or famine, or fundraising. They were witnessing rebirth. Queen had come to prove nothing, but somehow they were proving everything. As Freddie moved from piano to microphone, the rhythm shifted into Radio Gaga. His hands clapped above his head. The audience mirrored him instantly. Tens of thousands of palms slapping the air in perfect unison. And just like that, Queen had them. Every hand, every voice, every heartbeat. By the time Radio Gaga hit its chorus, Wembley had stopped being a crowd. It had become an instrument. 70,000 voices, 70,000 claps, one rhythm. The stadium pulsed like a single living heart, and at its center stood Freddie Mercury, a man who just hours before could barely speak. He wasn't singing to the audience anymore, he was singing with them. Every gesture, every glance, every flash of his eyes seemed to command the sky itself. The energy that poured from him was magnetic. The kind of power that can't be rehearsed, can't be planned. It just happens. Roger locked in behind the drums, grinning as the sea of people moved in sync with every beat. John's bass rumbled like a heartbeat beneath the noise. Brian stepped forward into the sunlight, his guitar glinting as the first notes of Hammer to Fall ripped through the air. And that's when it hit him.
I remember looking out and thinking, this isn't a concert anymore. It's a conversation. Freddie was talking to the world in a language only he could speak, and the world for once was listening.
In that moment, Queen weren't a band clawing their way back. They were giants again. Every riff, every harmony, every scream from the crowd was rewriting their story in real time. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky gold as Crazy Little Thing Called Love rolled in. Freddie danced across the stage, his microphone stand spinning like an extension of his own heartbeat. The fear of the morning was gone, the doubts erased. Now only the music remained, unstoppable and free. Halfway through their set, something intangible shifted. You could feel it, like static in the air before a storm. Freddie had the crowd in the palm of his hand, and even those watching from their living rooms across the world could sense it. Something extraordinary was unfolding. From the stage, the sea of faces looked endless. Every camera flash was a heartbeat. Every echo of Freddie's voice bounced off the steel of Wembley and came back 10 times louder. Queen weren't performing for the audience anymore. They were performing because of them. The cameras cut to Bob Geldof backstage. He stood frozen, jaw slightly open, staring at the monitors. He'd doubted them. He'd nearly left them off the lineup entirely. And now his expression said what everyone else was thinking. This was perfection. The kind of magic that no one could ever manufacture. As Hammer to Fall crashed into its final chords, Brian's guitar soared, slicing through the air like light. Roger's drums followed, sharp and thunderous. Freddie, drenched in sweat, threw his head back and laughed. The real laugh, the kind his friends hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of joy returning, of life, not survival. When they transitioned into We Will Rock You, something clicked between them. A silent acknowledgement that this was it. The second chance, the redemption arc. Backstage technicians stopped what they were doing. Other artists leaned against the scaffolding, watching quietly. Elton John whispered to someone nearby, "They've stolen the show." Freddie wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was simply being Freddie Mercury again. Bold, fearless, and utterly alive. And in that realization, Queen became timeless. As the final notes of Crazy Little Thing Called Love faded into the warm hum of the crowd, Freddie stepped back, catching his breath. His chest rose and fell with exhaustion, but his eyes, they were glowing. The band glanced at each other. There were no words. Then Roger counted them in with 4 soft taps of his sticks. The opening beat of We Will Rock You thundered across Wembley like the pulse of a giant. The crowd stomped and clapped, 100,000 boots and palms echoing against the sky. Cameras shook from the sheer vibration. Even from miles away, you could feel it. When the song ended, Freddie didn't stop. He leaned into the microphone and whispered, "All right, my beauties, let's do this together." Then came We Are the Champions. The piano began softly, almost fragile. Freddie's voice, strained from the long day, carried a weight that wasn't just performance, it was confession. Every lyric felt like a reflection on everything they'd endured. The fights, the fatigue, the doubt, the years of being misunderstood. For those few minutes, time dissolved. The audience wasn't an audience anymore, it was a choir. The sky itself seemed to sing. Roger's drums built like thunder beneath the words. Brian's guitar rose like a cry of triumph. And Freddie, eyes closed, lifted the microphone high as if declaring victory over every hardship that had ever tried to silence them. When the song ended, he stood there for a moment, still glowing in the gold light of sunset, and smiled. It wasn't arrogance. It was peace. That's when everyone watching, whether at Wembley or halfway across the world, understood it. This wasn't just Queen's comeback, it was their resurrection. When the last note of We Are the Champions faded into the roar of the crowd, Queen walked off stage slowly, not triumphantly, but quietly, like men who had just survived something bigger than themselves. The hallway behind Wembley's main stage was narrow and dim. The sound of applause still thundered through the concrete walls. Freddie was breathing hard, his voice shot, his shirt drenched in sweat. Roger set his sticks down on a case and leaned against the wall, laughing breathlessly. John Deacon just stared at the floor, lost in thought. Brian followed a few steps behind, his guitar still in hand. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say.
When we came off stage, none of us spoke. There was nothing to say. It was like we'd just witnessed something sacred, and words would have spoiled it.
Outside, Bob Geldof was pacing, trying to rally the next act. When Queen passed him, he stopped mid-sentence, looked at Freddie, and muttered under his breath, "You've just stolen the day." Inside the band's trailer, it was calm. Freddie dropped into a chair, reached for a towel, and finally exhaled. "Thank God that's over," he said with a laugh. But even he knew it wasn't over. Something had changed. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the muffled echo of the next act taking the stage. The cheers still hadn't faded. None of them said it, but they all felt it. Something had been reborn out there. And for the first time in years, Queen felt like Queen again. In the days that followed Live Aid, the headlines said it all. Queen stole the show. Mercury's resurrection. Rock history rewritten. But inside the band, it wasn't about fame anymore. It was about something deeper. They'd come to the concert fractured, uncertain if there was even a band left to save. And they left as a family again.
When I watched the footage later, I realized how perfectly it all came together. It wasn't planned that way. It just happened. That's what makes it magical. We didn't go out there to be the best. We just wanted to play. And somehow, the universe did the rest.
The press couldn't stop talking about them. Critics who had once dismissed Queen as over-the-top now called them revolutionary. Radio stations replayed their 20-minute set on loop. For weeks, Queen was the most searched word in the music world, and Freddie's white tank top became as iconic as his voice. Back in London, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Promoters, producers, record labels, everyone wanted Queen again. But for the four of them, what mattered most was something no one else could see. That spark they'd lost had come back. Freddie called Brian one evening not long after. There was no hello, no small talk. Just, "Darling, let's get back in the studio. I've got ideas." That call changed everything. Within months, they were writing again. The energy was raw. The songs urgent. Live Aid had given them what no award or chart position ever could. A reason to keep creating. And though none of them said it out loud, they all knew it. That stage, that day, had saved not just their careers, but their souls. 40 years later, people still talk about that day. Some remember the songs. Others remember the sound. That impossible roar of 100,000 voices moving as one. But for those who were there, and for the millions who watched from their living rooms, Live Aid wasn't just a concert. It was a reminder that music, at its core, is still the most powerful force we have to unite strangers. Queen didn't just perform that day. They transcended.
It wasn't just Freddie's day. It was ours too. We rediscovered who we were, what we were capable of, and what music still meant to us. Sometimes you don't realize you've lost something until you find it again in front of the whole world.
Every frame of that performance has become part of history. Freddie in his white tank top, his fist raised to the sky, leading humanity in perfect rhythm. It's the kind of image that doesn't fade, it imprints itself on time. After Live Aid, Queen weren't just back. They were immortal. Their albums soared once again. Their tours sold out across continents, and Freddie shone brighter than ever, even as his body began to betray him. But if you ask Brian, Roger, or John what they remember most, it isn't the fame, or the reviews, or the money. It's the silence after the last note. That moment when they looked at each other and knew they'd just done something that would outlive them all.
We didn't save the world, but that day, maybe, we saved ourselves.
And as the sun set over Wembley that July evening, the music didn't end. It simply changed form, echoing forever in the hearts of everyone who was lucky enough to hear it.